Thanks everybody for joining us today. I have the privilege today of being with my friend Scott Wells. He is going to talk to us today about two different topics. He'll be talking first about roofs. There's a lot going on with roofs and what's important to know about that and how he can guide us. And then he's also going to talk to us about foundation repair because he is one of the experts that we work very closely with in both areas. And I'll tell you what's been so great for Senior Downsizing Experts. Forgot to tell you, I'm Ingrid Sullivan with Senior Downsizing Experts. What's great for us is that we have some really great partners that we work with that love working with seniors like we do. And Scott is one of them. So I'm going to welcome Scott to the Smart Senior Series seminar series. And Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself so that we kind of know who we're working with.
All right, no problem. Well, hey, Ingrid, it's great to be with y'all this morning. And my name, like you said, is I'm Scott Wells, and I'm with Integrity Foundation Repair and Watertight Roofing. Both Integrity Foundation Repair and Watertight Roofing are both owned by Jeff Marshall. He's been in the business about 20 years, and we're a foundation roofing company that are marketed solely through real estate agents. So while we do get quite a bit of business on referrals once we've dealt with people, originally probably about 80 to 90% of our work is on a sales transaction of some kind, either being bought or sold, which makes us a little bit different than a lot of companies that would consider themselves our competitors because we're used to dealing with stuff on the transactions, either being bought or sold. And it's a little bit of a different ball game in both areas dealing with those type of repairs.
So that's really an important thing that you said there, Scott, because for some people that are attending our seminar series or happen to be watching our interview today, they might not be at a place where they're going to be involved in a real estate transaction, but they know us and they know that we have great partners, and they may call us and ask us if we can refer somebody to them that could help them or take a look at their roof. You could still do that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. So one of the things that happens for us is that when we go out and do a consultation with somebody for the first time, we're looking at, and we've been invited over because they might be thinking of selling or downsizing in their home. We're there to look to see what kinds of things are taking place at their home that might need attention in the event that a real estate transaction takes place. And some of the big things that we really try to impart on them is the roof is a big deal. And the foundation is a big deal, along with plumbing and electric and those other things. But the two biggies are the roof and the foundation, the top of us and underneath us. And that's where it's been important in our consultation to share that. So when we invite you to come and do a consultation with one of our clients, what do you do? What's the first step that you do? And tell us about what you consider to be a necessary repair.
A necessary repair, well, they vary. Different things are considered necessary on the roofing end versus the foundation end. On the foundation end, a lot of times I'll get involved when somebody such as yourself goes out and does a consultation and sees a property for the first time, for somebody that's talking about listing, and you notice something that, since you've been doing this for a hot minute, you notice something that kind of draws a flag for you, which is usually cosmetic stress on a foundation. And that can be the first indications that you might have something wrong. Now, there are other things that make the criteria for a foundation failure and foundation movement are two different things. So cosmetic stress is due from the foundation moving, not necessarily from it failing. Movement and cosmetic stress are something that have to be looked at to see if it's something that is going to have to be repaired before a house can be sold. That's usually where I get involved. If somebody notices a little something cosmetically going on, they ask me to come out and do a full evaluation at that point. That way, okay, when you do those things before you list a property, then you're not getting tripped up once you're under contract. And it's just, you know, when you look at it on the front end, it just keeps things moving quicker on the back end.
I see. I see. Okay, so we're gonna kind of back up a minute, and we're gonna talk about foundations first versus roofs.
Okay.
So that being said, everybody says that if you live in Texas, and I'm sure it's like that in other parts of the country, it's not if you have foundation problems, it's when you have foundation problems. Or did I say that right?
No, that's relatively accurate. Northeast Texas, and there are parts of Arkansas, parts of Oklahoma that fall into this category too, but Texas has a lot of foundation issues. Northeast Texas has more so than the rest of the state. We have this black clay soil when you get down far enough. And this black clay soil expands more when it's wet than any other type of soil. When it's dry, it contracts back more than any other type of soil. So what you end up with is you'll have one situation or the other at most places in the country. Texas, we're blessed to have it on both ends of the scale. What that means, since we have the extreme movement with our soil, that means the foundation moves more, which in the end leads to failure more than it does in other parts of the country. Now, foundation, the word failure is kind of makes people a little bit jumpy, but all foundation failure means is that it's something that needs Piers put on it, something that needs addressed, that needs corrected. Doesn't mean it's not fixable by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. Okay. So
you're right. Everything around here is going to get worked on at one time or another, just about.
Okay, well, that's a good thing for people to know, so they don't need to be thinking that it's just their property, or that builder that built that house didn't build it right. They just knew that's what happened. I've seen stress cracks in new homes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that being said as well, I know that for you and I, on some occasions, there have been stress cracks in the house, but that didn't necessarily mean that they needed to have any work done on their property at that time. Correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When you go out and you look at a property, like when I get called out to do an evaluation, the first thing I do after introduction is I visit with the folks, ask them what they're seeing as far as what they're identifying or what they think might be problem areas, what's got me out there in the first place, more or less. From that point, I go outside, I do a drawing of the outside of the house on my iPad, and while I'm drawing that footprint, I'm looking for cosmetic stress on the exterior. That can be in the form of step cracks or separations between the brick veneer and the window frames, all kinds of small indicators like that. Freeze board separations in the trim, things that have been caulked, like a caulk line, that is 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch wide, big enough to stick your hand in, that somebody has caulked up thinking it was maintenance, more than likely foundation problems. At that point, when I have the exterior done, I move on the inside, look at cosmetic stress on the inside as well. That's doors that might be out of square or binding up, not opening, or what they call a ghost door, a door that when you push it just about open or closed, it shuts by itself the other direction. All those things are indications that a house is not level, but houses aren't level. Doesn't mean it's failing. What you have when you have cosmetic stress, I set what we call a zip level up on the inside of the house, and I go around and I measure from the center of the house to the perimeter of the house. Now, the American Standard of Civil Engineering says that I have a tolerance amount, which is 1 inch and 20 feet. So I'm looking for cosmetic stress around the exterior of the home and the interior, as well as elevation measurements that are low or past those standards of civil engineering.
Okay. Okay. Now, some people have said, me being in the real estate business, everybody's got a different point of view. I've heard some people say, well, before you ever call anybody out to do the type of measuring that you're suggesting, you should call a structural engineer first. And that structural engineer is going to determine how things need to be done. What's your feeling on that?
That is one way that you can go about it. The difference in between calling me out and calling a structural engineer out, one big difference is that an engineer's report is going to cost you $500, regardless of what he finds, or somewhere in the neighborhood of $500, regardless of what he finds. But if you choose to go that route, a structural engineer will come out and either tell you everything is fine, or he'll write you a repair plan. And then if he writes you a repair plan, then you can just give that to the foundation company. You do have the thought or the peace of mind that you have an uninvolved third party that way, as long as you don't mind incurring that cost. And just because I come out and look at something, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do what I say needs to be done. That's just exactly what it is. You're having me come out for my opinion and what my recommendations would be.
So you talked about Piers, and not every, there's actually two things I want to ask you about. Let me back up for a second. You mentioned something, and our audience may know this, but I am not always aware of what the definitions are. You talked about freeze board. What is that? I mean, is that like in the freezer?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of lingo
Get too techy on us now.
Right, exactly. So freeze board is it's usually a 1x4 or a 1x6 board, and it runs up at the very top of the brick line, in between the top of your exterior wall, where the top of the brick wall meets the soffit and fascia, which cover up the roof framing.
Okay.
And that trim board around there is what covers up the transition in between those two things, in between the roof framing and
it's called freeze board.
Yep.
You freeze it in place.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now, then something else that you mentioned, that one way to correct a problem is to install piers. Are there different types of piers?
Yes. There are two types of piers that Integrity installs. That's pressed concrete piers, and then there's also a steel cylinder pier, which is about a 2.5-inch piece of 1/4-inch pipe. Now, concrete piers are kind of the industry standard. They've been around. They've been installing them for about 50 years on concrete foundations, and it's a 6-inch cylinder by 1 foot long concrete pier. I mean, they sell them at Home Depot. I can just about guarantee you people might not know what they are, but once they see one, then they'll say, "Oh, I've seen those sitting around everywhere."
Yeah.
Now, the main difference, well, there's two main differences in concrete and steel piers outside of just the material. Concrete piers are made of just that, concrete. Concrete is what? Rock that's pressed together. So what that means is over time, about a 30 to 40 year period, the bottom of the concrete piers will start to crack and fall apart because they're going back into the earth. They're turning back into individual pieces of rock. At that point, then you got to come out and you got to do some adjustments. The difference with steel is you have this steel pipe, and they drive probably about 15% deeper than concrete, and they also have next to no movement. We do less than 3% of the steel piers that we install ever need to get adjusted. Now, the kicker is steel piers are $150 more per pier than a concrete pier. Significant, almost 50% more. That's because steel costs so much more than concrete. On real estate transactions, concrete piers are the norm. The reason is a lot of times the foundation repairs fall on the buyer's or on the seller's side of the transaction.
Right.
And the seller owes the people buying the house that they owe them for what needs to be corrected now and the industry standard for that. And our concrete piers come with a lifetime warranty, just like our steel piers. So concrete piers are definitely the industry standard on a real estate transaction.
Well, that was my next question when you said lifetime warranty, because I know that a lot of times when there's been foundation work on a property, especially when we have a buyer, they're wanting some kind of proof that once the seller's gone, if something happens foundation wise, that they can call somebody, and we always want them to have that warranty. What happens if somebody had some foundation work done by a company that all of a sudden they're gone? You check the Better Business Bureau, they're gone. They're no longer around, but there was a warranty that was offered on that, and now we need work done, and they weren't anticipating paying for that. How do we do that?
Well, so I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is certainly something that we run into quite a bit. man, so many of these smaller companies are here today and kind of gone tomorrow. We run into it so much that Integrity offers what we call a warranty buyout program, and that's when there's a company that's gone out of business. Or the other thing is, you might hold a warranty with a company who just won't respond. They won't. They've sold the work, they've sold the Piers, they're still in business, but you've gone through 8 or 10 phone calls trying to get them to come out and do a warranty adjustment. They just don't respond.
Right.
In situations like that, we do offer a buyout program. It's less than having new Piers installed. We come out, do an evaluation. We charge per Pier for what you have in the ground. And then we pick up the warranty on those Piers for a certain amount of money. And that varies, the price varies on that a little bit, depends on if they need adjusting and how much.
I see.
And
Yeah.
in order to qualify for that, or to be considered for that, they've got to have their paperwork from the previous company. Because I've got to know what was done.
Yeah. Yeah. That was what I was going to ask, because for people that can't provide you with the schematic that shows where those Piers were installed, it's kind of looking for a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
Well, and it's not just a needle in a haystack. Well, yes, is the answer to that question. It's definitely like a needle in a haystack, because if you put 7 or 8 or however many Piers down a elevation wall, you're putting them on center from each other. So where the first one lands depends, once it goes in the ground, the second one is going to be on either a 7 or 8 foot center. Is the way Integrity does it. Well, if they start at 8 or 10 inch different spot to look for a Pier than another company, then they could dig the same amount of holes for Piers that are supposed to be there and never be able to find them. So you're right, it ends up just being a guessing game. And the other thing that we have run into is people being sold numbers of Piers, and then you go out there and they're not there. Or there's a different number of Piers there. So there's all kinds of different things that can be done.
Okay. Wow. Some of the houses that we've dealt with, and you and I just dealt with one earlier this year, they're pier and beam homes. Do they get steel piers also?
There's different types of pier and beam homes. Some pier and beam homes have what's called a grade beam going around them. That's basically like a concrete curb that the entire perimeter of the house sits on. And then there's beams and a crawl space instead of a slab underneath the rest of the house. So you do pier a concrete grade beam if it needs it, but you can also need to do all kinds of work in the crawl space area in between the beams and the concrete footings that the beams sit on.
Like a shim.
Yes, you can reset and reshim them. A lot of older homes, we do quite a bit of work in the different historical areas that have 100-plus-year-old pier and beams. A lot of those have not necessarily questionable materials used, but they had whatever materials that were being used when they were worked on last time. And chances are, when you're going behind something that was worked on 40 years ago, there's a different way of doing it or a better type of material now. So you'll do a reset and reshim and different things like that. Okay. Pier and beam homes require some maintenance to the foundation, as opposed to concrete slab foundations. You might have some soaker hoses out, but other than that, there's really no maintenance to be done to them. They either need Piers or they don't.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you is, no matter how old your house is there anything that you could do to help your house maybe not need to have adjustments as soon, or maybe not at all?
Oh, absolutely. So depending on how your roof is laid out, then you get a certain amount of watershed off the roof, and gutters in just about any situation are going to be helpful to regulate the amount of water. We don't think about it too much in Texas. We get used to these dry spells and these droughts where it doesn't matter whether we have gutters on our house or not. But in the last 7 years, we've been getting unbelievable amounts of rainfall. It's crucial to have a gutter system on, and that regulates the water coming off the roof when it does rain. Now, once you've done that and you've regulated the water flow off of your roof next to the foundation, the other thing is you don't want it to get too dry when it's getting to be like it is this time of year and your grass is dying and everything else. And in a situation like that, you'll want to water your foundation. And you can do that with soaker hoses. You can also set your sprinkler systems up. If you have a zone of your sprinklers that are just around the house, which that's the way they set most of the automatic sprinklers up, then you water more frequently around the house in that zone than you do the rest of the yard.
Oh, okay. All right. That sounds
And
good.
yep, that's about your only two. That's about your two areas of regular maintenance that
Okay. Okay.
that you address with the foundation.
Okay. Okay. A lot of times when the term foundation work comes up, um, people think that maybe they could just go ahead and get everything fixed in their house, have the cracks repaired, and move forward. And then an inspection turns out where there's now the inspector's also suspicious that there's foundation work needing to be done based on some of the signs that you mentioned to us. So when you put piers in a house, whether it be for a pier and beam or whether it be for a slab foundation, I imagine those cracks probably come alive again that you patched. And then do others show up, and how long does it take for the house to kind of settle down before you could really do something maybe the right way versus trying to cover it up in the beginning?
Well, yes, covering up repairs or covering up cosmetic stress from foundation issues. And a lot of times I see relatively frequently that a buyer or a home inspector might look at some repaired cosmetic stress as trying to hide foundation repairs. But a lot of times what I find in talking to people is they're just trying to maintain their home. They didn't realize that it was, that it was possibly foundation issues. All they know is they had a crack outside, so they put some silicone in it the last time that the painter came to paint the house, because that's what you do. But regardless, when you repair this cosmetic stress, you can, if you're trained to see it, you can almost always see it. There's also other things. You can feel deflection when you walk in a house. If you live in that house and you have a room, what we would call running downhill, or foundation deflection, I mean, you get used to walk around in a room and you're not going to feel it. But guys like me and the home inspector are trained to look at things. I mean, that's what we do for a living. So when we walk in a house, we feel a room running downhill, and that can draw your attention. You start seeing the cosmetic stress. Now, so at the end of the day, it'll come up that the repair needs to be done. And then when we come out and lift the house, yes, you're exactly right. It's going to damage the cosmetic repairs that a person has already done. And the other thing is, you might have cosmetic stress come up when you do a lift. It's not uncommon for doors and cracks to push back together. You'll see cracks in an interior wall push back together when you do a lift, and you can't find a crack there. Like, you couldn't patch it as good as it will push back together sometimes. But when that stuff pushes back together, there's also a chance that you might pop a seam or have a crack show up someplace else. At the end of the day, it's just more cost effective to wait until the repairs are done to address your cosmetic stress, whether it be inside or outside. It says on our contract that you're supposed to wait 60 days to address repairs. In my experience, if you wait about 2 weeks, then the house is done about all the moving it's going to do after you do a repair. There's some slight shifting that occurs after you do an adjustment, but like I said, in my experience, it's usually done doing that within the first couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good to know. Last thing I want to ask you about the foundation before we move on to something else. Foundation work for a lot of people, even the thought of that is, oh my gosh, I don't have the money for that. I'm gonna have to dip into my savings. I don't know. Maybe I'm just gonna let it stay like it is, and I'll just sell it to an investor. I mean, is it hugely expensive? Is it a second mortgage? I guess it kind of depends, but
Well, it absolutely depends. In my experience, foundation work, uh, it gets avoided, or it gets the, oh, it's just not that bad. It gets to be the big blue elephant in the closet for a lot of people, because they think it's going to be so expensive. And foundation repairs can get costly, but they don't have to be every time. And when we're talking about someone who's selling their house, we offer a fund to close transaction, where we can go ahead and we can do the repairs once you're under contract, and then we can get paid out of the proceeds when the house sells. So that helps soften the blow. The other thing that happens is people that think they need to address foundation repairs, like they might have had somebody look at something 7 or 8 years ago, and the person recommended 5 piers or 7 piers. It was $2,000 of work when they had it looked at 10 years ago, and $2,000 wasn't that big a deal, but they just didn't want to do it. They didn't think it was that significant. Now, 10 years later, they're getting ready to sell the house, and all of a sudden it needs $5,000 worth of work. Well, it's because once they need work, they don't fix themselves. Yeah. And especially if you cover the cosmetic stress up, it's kind of it can be an out of sight, out of mind issue. But at the end of the day, once it's out of tolerance and once it's moving back and forth the way that they tend to do here, it's just not going away. And if you do address things on the front end when you first find out, you can spend $2,000 worth of work when you find out you need it, and it has a lifetime warranty. But if you happen to be on the other end of that spectrum and you knew about something, or you just found out about something and it's on the sales transaction, like I said, we offer the fund to close option. So and that can help people out a lot of times.
Okay. Well, is there anything about foundation work, foundation in general, that I didn't ask you today that in closing you feel is important to share with our audience?
Well, I tell you what, I think you covered it pretty well, Ingrid. You've been doing this a minute, so you know the questions to ask and things to look for. What I find, we're doing so much work in the real estate market that just makes such a difference if a house is being sold, is just have it look. If you think you could possibly have a problem, just go ahead and make sure you have it looked at before you get listed. And if you wait, it can definitely be done, but everything is just a little bit more of a hurry then. If we look at them on the front end, when you think you have a problem, then it's something that we can address with that we know might be coming,
So if it's not a problem, how do you help me as the realtor share with the buyer that you said it's not a problem?
Oh, I'll include, so there's only two outcomes when I come to look at a property for you. Either it needs work or it doesn't. If it needs work, then it gets an agreement filled out, which is basically our contract that describes the scope of work that we recommend needs to be done, which comes with a diagram that shows where the piers are going to be, what elevation measurements were, that kind of thing. It looks kind of like an engineering diagram is what it kind of looks like. Now, if it doesn't need any work, then it gets a no problem letter, which just means I send an email that says, I've looked around, there's nothing about this house, there's nothing about the cosmetic stress that I've seen that makes me think that that's an indication of foundation failure. The foundation appears to be operating in its design capacity. A lot of times when I write that, when I look at something beforehand, before a house gets listed, then a lot of times a realtor will take my no problem letter and put on the MLS or make it as a part of the document, so they show them that they've done their due diligence, had everything looked at on the front side. Once again, it's just something that can keep things moving for you a little bit better.
Yeah, I've done that, yes, and that's very comforting. Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do is I would like to thank you for sharing your knowledge as one of our experts on foundation for us. And for those of you that are watching the interview that we had today with Scott Wells from Integrity Foundation, we will have his name and his phone number posted at the end of our session today, so that if you have further questions or you'd like to set up an appointment with him, you'll have that information and the phone number to get in touch with his office so that they can help him with the schedule at the time that's appropriate for you. So in the meantime, though, Scott, that precludes our interview on foundations.
You bet.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.